Tests, tests. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm wearing a mic. So I hope the audio is better. If not, I have a problem. Hello there, I'm Simon. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic is once again Avatar. Because yes, I found something else to talk about. One of the most quotable lines from the series is of course the simple exclamation, "My cabbages!" For those of you who haven't seen the show, this line is said a couple of times throughout the show by a particularly determined cabbage salesman. He says it because usually when he appears on the show, it usually means his produce is about to be destroyed. Cabbage Guy was supposed to be a one-off character, but he kept appearing and ended up becoming everyone's favorite side character. Right? That's just me. After the events of The Last Airbender, he was inspired to pursue machinery and industry instead, and that led to the founding of a successful company called Cabbage Corp, which we see in Legend of Korra. But that's not what I'm actually talking about. I was just happy to find out he turned out alright. Anyway, what I want to talk about is the Cabbages. This guy is defined by his cabbages. It's what he does. To such a degree that he ends up calling his company Cabbage Corp, even though it has nothing to do with cabbages anymore. So I was wondering, what's the deal? Why cabbages? What does it mean? So I decided to do some research. And because I have a YouTube channel, I have an excuse. So these are symbolism or myths associated with cabbages. And what does that mean for the cabbage guy? From a practical, economic point of view, it's actually pretty straightforward. Cabbages are everywhere, in a very literal sense. Cabbages are an important ingredient in pretty much every national kitchen ever. That's because they are really easy to cultivate and customize. For a very subjective understanding of easy. Like, there's no way I could do it, but for a farmer, it makes things very easy. You knew that. Anyway, cabbages go all the way back to prehistory, and since then, people have been cultivating them, and they have been experimenting with them. Over the centuries, they basically used selective breeding and stuff to optimize the cabbage for agricultural purposes. Cabbages only need 3 months to grow, and they produce massive numbers. And that makes them the perfect vegetable for human consumption. Well, that and its internal chemistry. But I'll get to that. But those properties make them a farmer's dream, because they take minimal time to produce maximal supply, right? And since humans always have a demand for nutritious food, there is this perfect economic equilibrium. That means that the cabbage flourished. Now, because of this abundance of cabbages, they kind of became a symbol for fertility. For example, there's the myth, and yes, it is indeed a myth, sorry to burst your bubble, that babies come from cabbages. Of course, that's ridiculous. We all know babies are actually delivered by storks. But it shows the connection pretty well. But what does that mean for Cabbage Guy? Well, unfortunately, there's just not enough information about him to really know. So it's possible that Cabbage Guy has a lot of descendants, or siblings, nephews, I don't know. But we don't know. We know he has at least one son, the guy who leads Cabbage Corp in Korra's time. But that's all. I also considered theorizing that maybe his wife is a waterbender from the Northern Water Tribe because of the healing, and because there's a legend about your future spouse being revealed by cabbages. But there's just no evidence, so I'm just gonna move on. Now, cabbages were also said to have healing properties. It was the early days of medicine. They didn't have microscopes. All they could do was try stuff and see what happened. People like Cato the Elder and Plinius Major, who wrote about the natural history. His book is literally called Naturalis Historia. Both said that cabbages are the best medicine there is. And that's not very surprising, considering they contain a lot of chemical stuff that is very healthy. For example, it contains copious amounts of vitamin C, which our body does not in fact make itself. And as a reason, sailors often brought along a lot of cabbages, so they wouldn't get scurvy. Other than that, they have a bunch of other chemicals that do your body a lot of good. I know that's an easy way to be done with it, but I'm not a chemist or a doctor, so I don't know. If you're interested, ask your local dietitian. Now, if you know all this, it is not in any way surprising that the cabbage became very popular. The abundance meant that they could be sold at low prices, which made it something everyone could get their hands on, which in turn gave the cabbage a bit of a name of being poor people's food. Not that the Chinese were really bothered by that. They bleeping loved cabbages. So much so that the Chinese word for cabbage is also just their word for vegetable in general. Because if you're eating veggies, odds are it's gonna be cabbage anyway. There was a poet, and I'm gonna butcher his name, Su Dongpo, who lived around the 11th century, and he praised the cabbage for its taste, calling it a delicacy, which I find weird, because if you ask me, its taste is pretty much the only thing you can't praise about them. But nobody asked. There is even a folk song about the cabbage. I don't know how it goes or what the lyrics are, but it exists. It became a tradition to just stock up on cabbages each year before winter came, and just pile them up in the cellar. That way people were sure they would have food all winter. That is how important cabbage was. And its popularity pretty much never waned. Am I glad I get to just say it? Because I haven't got a clue how to spell waned. By the time Mao came along, cabbage was of course still there, and it became the core ingredient for the planned economy. Beijing at some point even established a so-called autumnal vegetable command post, aka the Baikai office, Baikai being the word for cabbage, to make sure everyone got their dose of cabbage. Now, if you've seen the show, you will probably have realized that while it draws inspiration from many places, and has a good amount of fantasy for good measure, it draws most of its inspiration from Asian culture. The Earth Kingdom in particular is mostly based on China. I mean, what a surprise, right? It's got a huge wall, a ruler who lives in a palace surrounded by servants who think they're a god, and far away from the real world. Not to mention the visual comparisons. Oh, in case you're wondering, the water tribe is based on the Inuit, the air nomads are based on Tibet, and the Fire Nation is based on Japan. The more you know. So I think it's safe to say that if cabbages are important to China, they're probably pretty important to the Earth Kingdom too. So it's no surprise that there are cabbage people all over the place. Now, in aneromancy, which is a big word for dream interpretation, dreaming of cabbages is generally considered a sign of good fortune. And given this guy's job, I think Cabbage Guy has probably dreamt of cabbages at least once in his life. It's literally his name. For real though, it's quite literally his name. How do I know? Well, we never get his name, but we do know the name of this guy. This is the boss of Cabbage Corp, and he is Cabbage Guy's son. Now, this guy's name is Lao Ganlan. Lao is actually a title, and can be translated as Mr. And Ganlan basically just means cabbage, meaning this guy's name is literally Mr. Cabbage. And if we assume it's custom in the Earth Kingdom to put a family name after the personal name, as it is in the modern Western world, and the Beifongs and Satos follow that rule, so I'm gonna assume it applies here too, then Cabbage Guy's real name is literally Cabbage. What was I talking about? Right, dreams. So Mr. Cabbage has probably dreamt of cabbages at some point, and given that he sells a product that's highly in demand, you would expect him to be very successful, and yet he keeps getting his cart wrecked. But eventually he does catch a lucky break when he is inspired to get into industry. There's a couple more things that cabbages symbolize, but if I'm honest, they're not very relevant for Cabbage Guy. But there is one more thing I want to mention, which is that the cabbage is part of the so-called Cruciferi family, which is called that because they have 4 petals, which kinda resembles a cross. Now, I'm not about to tell you that Cabbage Guy is secretly Jesus. They don't even look alike. The cross actually has an older interpretation, one that is a lot more meaningful in this context. Specifically, there is the Greek cross, which is just the cross, but all the legs are the same length, and that symbolizes the 4 elements. And in this case, I suppose, the 4 nations. So I think it's very significant that Cabbage Guy's life changed forever when he met the Avatar, bender of all 4 elements, and by pursuing his dream of selling cabbages, he ended up being successful. And he made his base in Republic City, a city built to unite benders and non-benders from all 4 nations. I think I'm reading too much into it again. I think it's time for the YouTube thing. Let's be honest here, this is not your first YouTube video. You know the drill by now. If you have a question about anything I've just said, a suggestion for a future video, a correction of a mistake I made, or just something to say, you can do it down below. You will also see a thumbs up and a thumbs down button, so please consider clicking the one that applies. I have a personal preference, of course, but I can't tell you what to do. If you liked this video, please consider checking out my channel, because I have a lot more of this nerdiness. And while you're there, please subscribe and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to know when I upload a new video. And in the description box below, you can find my sources and my socials. And I think that's it, right? Thanks for watching!